Okay, it's a pleasure as always to have the opportunity to do some learning with you today. And the goal of our time together is to share some what I hope will be food for thought. And uh, these are some kind of independent nuggets that, again, I hope will be provocations that you can use as prompts at your Seder to trigger what I hope will be very full and fruitful conversations about the themes of the evening. So let me begin with where most of us begin, and that is the singing of Kadesh, Orchatz, Karpas, Yachatz. We sing the steps of the Seder. We call them simanim. Like these are the signposts of the Seder. They helped guide us. Some people say them before each step of the Seder. Later on, we have Rabbi Yehuda, who also has simanim in the Magid section. He condenses the 10 plagues into Datzah, Chadash, Bi'achav. And these are actually just the tip of the iceberg. If you look at older Haggadahs, there are dozens and dozens of simanim for how to organize the Seder, how to keep track of all the various parts of the Seder. And the question is, why did this evening produce so many of these simanim? Obviously, on the most straightforward level, it's because there's so much to keep track of, and we want to be sure that we don't miss anything. But on another level, these codes, the Roshei Tevos, they're acronyms, they're little ditties sometimes, little puzzles. They keep us sharp. And that really is the preface for the whole evening. We want to keep the kids and everyone at the Seder table on their toes and make sure that they don't miss a beat. So to the extent that we can give them little puzzles to keep in mind or solve, that will help help everyone stay sharp. Toward the beginning of the Seder, we break the middle matzah. Why are we breaking the middle matzah? So, of course, we know the answer is because the matzah that we're eating on Seder night is lechem oni. It's the poor man's bread. And kachi darka shel ani. This is what the poor person does. He stashes a little away for later and keeps some for now. But there's also a whole level of symbolism associated with yachatz breaking the middle matzah, and there's a very developed stream of thought among the commentaries that the breaking of the matzah symbolizes the other splitting in the Yetzias Mitzrayim story, namely the splitting of the Red Sea. So that's interesting. That's fascinating. Only so many splits we have. If we're splitting the matzah, maybe that's evocative of the splitting of the Red Sea. But it just raises another question, which is, why would we start with, functionally, you could actually call in some ways Yam Suf, the splitting of the Red Sea, you could call that the end of the story. That's when we can finally exhale. The Egyptians are gone, our enemies are behind us, and we're now actually free to look to our future. So if that's the case, why are we starting at the end? It's interesting to talk about Kriyas Yamsuf, but why is it so out of place? And I think part of the answer might be that it's quite intentional, which is to say, this is a device that writers use, that playwrights use. Sometimes you'll give us a hint of what happens at the end or toward the end to provoke interest and have people ask the question implicitly or explicitly. Well, how do we get there? How are we going to get there? So maybe part of what we're doing, to the extent that anyone is conscious of this symbolism toward the beginning of the Seder, is saying, hey, look, this is quite a miracle that we're going to come to at the climax of this story. Wouldn't be interesting to know what led up to this exciting part of the story. Everyone, again, implicitly or explicitly, we're sending the signals. Everyone should be paying attention. One of the questions that the poskim like to ask is a halachic question. We have a mitzvah called Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Torah tells us, "V'gatel mincha bayamahu lemor," that on the 15th of Nisan, we all have an obligation to tell the story of the Exodus, to transmit the story to the next generation. It's not just a nice thing to do, and the real mitzvah is eating the matzah. Eating the matzah is a mitzvah, and telling the story is a mitzvah. That is the mitzvah. Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is the mitzvah. You could accomplish it by reading the Haggadah. You could accomplish it by having a conversation. A lot of ways to accomplish it, but when we perform a mitzvah saseh deraisa, we say a bracha. I have a lulav. The Torah says it's the 15th of Tishrei. I'm supposed to pick up the lulav. So before I pick it up, I say a bracha. I'm going to eat this matzah tonight. Before I eat the matzah, I say a bracha. So why don't I start the Seder, start the Magid section of the Seder with a bracha? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kasham mitzvanu v'tzanu lesaper sipur yetzias Mitzrayim. Some formulation like that. One of the most compelling answers to this question highlights one of the major themes of the evening, and that is when a particular mitzvah has no means by which to be quantified, you don't make a bracha. So, for instance, the mitzvah of kibbud av v'em. I have to honor my parents. Well, when have I fulfilled the mitzvah? Well, I don't know when I fulfilled the mitzvah. It's ongoing. Okay, there's a mitzvah for me to give tzedakah. So why don't I say a bracha on giving tzedakah? When have I? You could always give more tzedakah. So for mitzvos that do not have a shear, for mitzvos that do not have a shear, we do not make a bracha. Okay. So let me just adjust the settings here. I apologize. For mitzvahs that do not have a shear, we do not make a bracha. So the ethic on Seder night is kol hamarbeh reza meshubach, the more the merrier. So to the extent that we can keep on telling the story and elaborating and amplifying and embellishing, that's even better. So on this category of mitzvah, we'll do the mitzvah, but we're not going to say a bracha. There's a lot of commentaries on the questions of Manishtana, and I saw one this year, and I said, "Wow, I had never thought about that before." Which, you think you've seen it all. So there are 4 questions in the Manishtana. We know them by heart, and it's actually interesting to notice that the Manishtana can be broken up into the first 2 questions and the second 2, and they contradict each other. What do I mean? What the first 2 questions are about matzah and maror. So again, if you put the genie back in the bottle, you're coming to the Seder for the first time, you're thinking about matzah, you're thinking about maror and what they are all about, what they symbolize. So here you have poor man's bread and maror, which commemorates the bitterness of Egyptian slavery. So those are symbols of abdus. Those are symbols of the terrible years we spent as slaves in Egypt. The next 2 questions about leaning and about dipping, well, those have the opposite symbolisms. We lean because we're free people, and that's the way that free people can function. We dip because we have abundance, and we can appreciate and enjoy abundance the way that a slave never could. And so part of the Manishtana actually is, how different is this night? How can we reconcile this tension? On the one hand, 2 questions about what it means to be an Eved, and then 2 questions about what it means to be a free person. Are we commemorating one? Are we commemorating the other? Or commemorating the tension between the 2? That's actually a provocation within the text of the Manishtana. So one of the questions that I just mentioned is this question about leaning, and we never actually explicitly answer the question, why do we lean, in the balance of the Seder. So why do we lean, right? And I just sort of tipped my hand. We're leaning because that's what free people do. And already in the medieval period, some of the poskim said, we don't really function that way. Our furniture isn't set up that way. So it's a little bit of a funny thing to do, because no one sees me leaning and thinks, oh, that must be an aristocrat. Aristocrats, that's just not how we function anymore. But be that as it may, that's the simple explanation of why we lean. There's a fascinating medrash that links leaning to the path of the Jewish people as we left Egypt. The Torah tells us, this is the beginning of Parshas Beshalach, Vayasev Elokim es ha'am, that Hashem took us in a roundabout way. Remember, we didn't have to end up at Yam Suf. We could have gone on a less circuitous route from Egypt to the Promised Land. But obviously, as we read the rest of the story, we understand that Hashem had quite an intentional plan and was leading us on this path for a very specific reason, because the miracle of Yam Suf was going to follow. So listen to this medrash. To lean, right? Haseba vayasev. The medrash says, "Mikan amar Rabbeinu afilu ani shebiyisrael lo yochel ad sheyesev shekach asa lahem la'kadosh baruch hu." The medrash says, from this pasuk vayasev Elokim es ha'am, that Hashem took us in a circuitous, leaning route. From here we learn that even a pauper must lean on Seder night at the Seder. So is it just like a wordplay? We have the word vayasev. It sounds like haseba, circuitous. So here's kind of a hint to leaning. Like, is that all it's about, or is there something more? So based on a commentary of the Ksav HaKabbalah and Rabbi Yaakov Mecklenburg and the Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, I wanted to suggest the following. I wanted to suggest that it's the story of Yam Suf that should actually give the pauper emunah and optimism. Because by leaning, he's meant to remember this lesson. Sometimes, and I think it's quite profound, sometimes Hashem takes us on a circuitous route. It's indirect, it's longer, it's not intuitive, maybe it's uncomfortable, maybe it causes us anxiety, but ultimately it leads to a moment of salvation. And so we remind the pauper on Seder night not to neglect this lesson. Yes, things might be trying and unpleasant in this moment, but just remember that redemption is only a few steps away. What's the narrative arc of the Seder? So the Mishnah tells us Maschil b'gnus u'Mesayim b'shevach, that we start with the less flattering parts of our national story and we end with the moment of praise. The arc leads us to appreciate what it is that Hashem did for us, so that we can sing Hallel and offer our praise to Hashem. There's a debate. Where do we start? Is it Avadim Hayinu? Is it Mitchila Ovdei Avodah Zarah? These are the questions that the Gemara tries to answer. And if you read the Rambam carefully, and you see this borne out over the course of the Haggadah, it's not just in the larger part of the story that we say Maschil b'gnus u'Mesayim b'shevach, but even in smaller units of the Haggadah itself, we find this theme over and over again. We constantly start with again, unflattering parts of our past and work our way forward. Okay. So the piece I wanted to add is this. Again, this is borne out in various sections of the Seder, but if you go back to the original Seder, go back to the original ethos of Korban Pesach, the Torah makes it very clear. Rav Hirsch has a beautiful essay about this, that no one person, no one family could really manage to consume an entire Korban Pesach on their own, and it has to be eaten all over the course of one evening, and it's eaten al hasova. It's not even the main course. So, every person gets just like one lamb chop, half a lamb chop. So how many, and it's not just the lamb chops, forgive me, I don't know all the cuts, but there's a lot of parts to the lamb that need to get consumed in a short period of time. So the Torah already tells us what's going to happen. The people who have an abundance are by definition going to be reliant on the people who don't have. Okay, so you're a person of means and you have enough, money to buy a whole lamb and make this whole feast, and I'm a person of less means, so you invite me to your seder because you need more consumers, you need more eaters at the seder meal. So the whole system is designed around this ethic of hachnasas orchim, this ethic of hospitality. We start with halachmanya. You see it weaved throughout the entire thread of the seder of the Haggadah. We're always keeping one eye on the person who doesn't have enough, making sure they're included, making sure that we're taking care of anyone who might otherwise be on the margin. And so perhaps the notion of maskal b'gnus u'mesayim b'shevach is not just conceptual, it's not just philosophical, but around our table, we're meant to have people who are not in a great circumstance. And so we keep reminding them at every step of the way. And it's stunning to notice this. Maskal b'gnus u'mesayim b'shevach. We're all children of paupers. That's our whole story. We came from people who, right, Yaakov Avinu, like he crossed that river running away from home, a refugee, a fugitive, he had nothing. And you see the continuation of the story. He left Lavan's house and he was in a much better financial position. And the Jewish people as a whole nation, we were avadim and we were slaves and we were penniless and we were downtrodden. And Yetzei B'Rechush Gadol. And then we left and we were in a much better position. So we keep on just signaling to the person around our table who might feel like they're on the, it's okay. We were all there. That's the story of our whole people. So don't be despondent, don't despair. We know where the arc bends, and it's always toward redemption, it's always toward a better spot. So we want to just keep emphasizing and hammering home this message over and again. It doesn't look good now. Things may be less than perfect in this moment, but we're a hopeful people because we know our history, and our history tells us that Maschal Begnus and Messiah B'Shevach, we always know the story ends with hope and optimism. Before we get to the four sons, there's a paragraph that we say Baruch Hamakom Baruch Hu. It's a little bit of a funny paragraph. It sounds a lot like Birkas HaTorah. And on one level, we're about to say a lot of drushos. We're going to do a lot of learning, and so we say a kind of Birkas HaTorah in the introduction to that section of the Haggadah. Just want to share with you an image from one of my favorite Haggadahs that I've shared with you in the past, the Mos Haggadah. And in the Mos Haggadah, this is how he tells us about the Arba Banim. The Arba Banim, you see what he has here? So you look, and there's much more to say about this, but he has Arba Banim as playing cards, as he says, because as parents, you never know the hand that you will be dealt. Could be a Chacham, it could be a Rasha, could be a Tam, could be a She'ena Yadei Alisho, lots of different kinds of children. But in that paragraph, Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu, Baruch Shenasan Torah L'Ama Yisrael, Baruch Hu, we say the word Baruch 4 times. And so he lines up each Baruch in the column of one of the 4 sons. And it's such a beautiful message. It's to remind us that whoever our children are, they are a blessing. They may fall into a category where they provide all kinds of challenges for us. So be it. Those sons and daughters, those children are all blessings, and it's in their aggregate that they come together to form the Jewish family and put us in a position to say, Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu, we thank Hashem for any lot that He has dealt us. I'm sure I've shared this in the past, but it's unusual that we refer to Hashem as Hamakom. Rav Soloveitchik famously said that you notice where we say the word Hamakom in reference to Hashem. One is in a base Avel. We say Hamakom Yinachem Eschem B'soch Shar Avelei Tzion B'Yisrael. One is on Kol Nidre night, when we Al Das Hamakom, when we invoke the name of Hashem using the word Makom, to invite in all the Avaryanim, all those who have been excluded, all those who are sinners. And Baruch Hamakom Baruch Hu, we use it to introduce the Arba Banim at the Seder, among whom is the Rasha. So Rav Soloveitchik said, these are moments when you might think, oh, Hashem is not here. In the base Avel, someone's just suffered this terrible loss. They're feeling crushed and defeated and broken. It feels like Hashem is absent. Yom Kippur night, the Avaryanim, the people who have done something to put themselves outside the normal bounds of the community, might think Hashem is absent from their lives. Or the Rasha, the one who shows up at the Seder table and starts making trouble, you might think Hashem is not with him. In fact, Baruch Hamakom Baruch Hu, it's Hamakom. We refer to Hashem as the omnipresent. Hashem is everywhere, even in those places where you might expect him to be absent. Lubavitcher Rebbe famously talked about the fifth son. There are generations, right? It began with the Alta Zedi, and there was a Chacham, and he would lead the Seder, and he knew Torah, and he kept the mitzvos. And then there was a generation of rebellion, that the kids who just wanted to acculturate and be American and feel like they were part of the gang, and they kind of left their Judaism behind. And the next generation was a Tom, and they kind of just went along until you got to a generation of a She'eni Yodei Lishol, where the Judaism was so diluted they didn't even know the questions to ask. And then is there a fifth child who knows so little that they don't even come to the Seder? And sadly, we see this in the Pew surveys, where more and more members of the Jewish community respond, how do you affiliate? What's your religion? What's your affiliation? And they say none. So it's not, I'm Jewish, but I don't practice. It's, I don't even consider myself to be part of the people. I'm not even coming to a Seder. And what a challenge and what an opportunity that presents for our generation to be able to connect and reconnect, to bring back around the table those who are not even identifying. Okay. The next thought I want to share with you comes from Leon Kass. Leon Kass wrote a book. I guess it's not so new anymore, but in the last maybe year or two, called "Founding God's Nation." It's a commentary on the book of Exodus. Very thoughtful commentary. And we say at the Seder, Yachal Rosh Chodesh, maybe you could start fulfilling the mitzvos that we always associate with Seder night, Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matzah and Maror and Pesach. Maybe you could start to do that already from Rosh Chodesh. And so the Haggadah quotes the Gemara that says, no, it can't be from Rosh Chodesh. It has to be on the 15th. It can't be in the day. It has to be at the night. It's a very specific moment when we fulfill these mitzvahs. So Leon Kass, not speaking specifically or not writing specifically about this paragraph in the Haggadah, makes an important observation. It says, in the ancient Near East and in a place like ancient Egypt, the worship, the cult, the religion was predicated on the goings and comings of the natural cycle. So here was the spring, which is precisely the time of the year when there is greatest reason to celebrate nature. And instead of celebrating nature, we turn in a different direction and we celebrate Hashem. So what happens on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. For others, the Chodesh is the whole thing, right? It's like the sun and the moon and the stars, and they're aligning, and it's because of this, particular alignment that we have rain and we have produce, and so we worship the sun or the moon or the nature, or whatever we worship. So along comes the Torah and says, no, that's not how we're going to function. We also observe and notice and care about the passage of time as marked by the new month. But we're not worshiping the new month. We're not worshiping the turning of that month or the object of that month, the moon or the sun, whatever the case may be. For us, the calendar is just a means by which to keep track of the dates, because it's going to be important that when we celebrate, we do it on a particular date on the calendar. But what we're celebrating isn't the natural cycle. What we're celebrating is God's intervention into the natural cycle. And that's maybe part of the reason why it's not the beginning of the month that we celebrate. Again, it's just a marker so that we can celebrate specifically not at the beginning of the month, on the 15th, at the very opposite time when perhaps others would be celebrating and worshiping something that we understand is not worthy of our worship. Okay. Let me turn for a second to the paragraph of the Hisha Amda. If you have the Haggadah in front of you, the Torah tells us about the Haggadah rather tells us about the Bris Ben Habesarim. Paragraph begins with the words Baruch Shomer Avtachaso Yisrael Baruch Hu. The Torah tells us that Hashem kept his word, his promise to Abraham that his Abraham's descendants would be strangers in a strange lands, but ultimately they would be redeemed. And then we say V'hisha Amda Lavosenu V'lanu. This is what sustains us. This is what sustained our ancestors, and this is what sustained us. So the question is, Vehi, what's the Vehi? So if you have a kid around your table, the kid will probably raise his hand and say, I'll tell you the Vehi. Vehi, Vav stands for Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. There's 6 orders of the Mishnah, and Hey are the 5 books of the Torah, and Yud is the 10 commandments, and 1 is Hashem. And because we kept the 6 books of the Mishnah, and the 5 books of the Torah, and the 10 commandments, and believed in Hashem, that's what sustained us, which is beautiful. But the Netziv offers a different explanation. The Vehi Sha'amda actually goes back to the previous paragraph. And what sustained us is not the promise and the emunah that we had that Hashem would redeem us, but rather a part of the promise that we gloss over. He says, Ki ger yezarcha be'eretz lo lahem. We would be strangers in a strange land. And Netziv, writing, at the end of the 19th century, very presciently, as reform is booming and blossoming, he says, it's when you act like strangers in a strange land, that's what will sustain you. If you become too at home in the diaspora, you will not be sustained, and you will not survive, and the Jewish story will not continue. There has to be some discomfort. There has to be some feeling that wherever I am, and America is a pretty great place to be if you have to be somewhere in the diaspora, considering the sweep of Jewish history. If you're going to be in the diaspora, as much hakaras hatov as we can have to our host country, there has to be some feeling of I'm not actually at home. And it's not just because they might turn on me. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But I have to understand that there's something different about me. There's something different about the Jewish people, and we're not just one of the gang. And the moment we start feeling like, oh, we're just one of the gang, is the moment we risk acculturation and assimilation. And the moment we risk not being in a position to say Behisha Amda, this is what sustained us. Okay, let me just pause here because I've said a lot and I see a couple hands. Any questions or comments before we continue? Okay, so happy to stay on, afterwards to take additional questions if we don't get to them during the session itself. Now, in the Arami Oved Avi section, we do a lot of we have a lot of drushos. These are kind of exegetical learnings that we do based on the medrash that help us learn the kind of deeper meaning of these psukim. So just to refresh your memory, Arami Ovid Avi is a paragraph that the farmer used to recite when bringing his first fruits to the temple. And it's 4 or 5 verses, and it's a beautiful snapshot of Jewish history, beginning with my great grandfather was a wandering Aramean, and we were oppressed, and we had nothing, and Hashem redeemed us and brought us to this land. And now look who I am. Look what I have. Here's the abundance of the promised land, the first fruits that the farmer would bring to the temple with this declaration. We're not bringing the first fruits on Seder night, but we co-opt that paragraph of Arami Ovid Avi because it's the perfect paragraph to fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. We need to tell the story of the. This is it. This is the best condensed thumbnail version of the story that we actually find in the Torah. We could read all of Sefer Shmos; it would take a very long time, or we could use the snapshot version, which the Torah itself provides. Arami Oved Avi. And each pasuk that we say, sometimes even each word that we say, we darshan and we explicate using the midrashic sources. One of the conclusions that we reach based on the medrash is a continuation of the theme that I was just mentioning, the notion of being mitsuyanim. We were literally outstanding. We stood out. We did something different. We were in Egypt for hundreds of years, and we didn't totally Egyptify. We kept some of our identity, and we remained people apart. Even Bas Paro, like she finds Moshe, she knows it's obvious to her that this is a Hebrew child, not an Egyptian child. So the Medrash asks, "B'schus ma nigalu Yisrael mimitzrayim?" In what merit did the Jewish people leave Egypt? And it's kind of a funny question. Maybe we didn't have any merits. Maybe it was just the promise that Hashem had made to Avraham. But the Medrash wants to identify merits that the Israelites had while living in Egypt, and it's a Medrash that we all learn as kids. What was special about the Jewish people? We didn't change our names, and we didn't change our language, and we didn't change our dress. And because we remained a people apart, at least in those conspicuous ways, we merited the redemption. There's actually a number of different versions of this medrash. And on the list are, if you do the cumulative list, there are actually 5 things. 5 things that we did to merit the redemption. We didn't change our names. We didn't change our language. We didn't change our clothes. We didn't speak Lashon Hara. And we were respectful of sexual boundaries. We didn't engage in the kinds of promiscuous extramarital relationships that were probably commonplace in the ancient Near East. So, is there some thread that binds these 5 qualities together? What is the significance of these 5 ways that we remained distinct? We didn't change our names, we didn't change our language, we didn't change our clothes, we didn't speak Lashon Hara, and we respected sexual boundaries. I want to suggest that it actually all comes back to the character of Yosef. And there's a few places where we implicitly or explicitly reference Yosef at the Seder. One of them is the dipping, right? We dip toward the very beginning of the Seder karpas in the salt water. So one of the reasons we dip is to commemorate an early dipping at the very beginning of the story that was responsible for getting us into Egypt. Why? It's the story of Mechiras Yosef. The brothers dipped his coat into blood and showed it to their father. What happened in that story? What happened in that story? Unwittingly, the brothers set into motion a chain of events which ends up landing them in Egypt. They sell their brother Yosef into slavery. He rises to the top, unbeknownst to them, and he becomes the viceroy of Egypt. And there's this whole plan based on the dreams about how to weather 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. The brothers are in Canaan. They haven't known about the plenty followed by the famine. They're just stuck with the famine. Yosef has a monopoly on grain. The brothers have to go down to Egypt to produce grain. One thing leads to the next. The only way that Yosef can end up sustaining his brothers is if he relocates them from Canaan to Egypt. The brothers settle in Goshen at the end of Sefer Bereshis. Next thing we know, we open up Sefer Shmos, and they're settled, ensconced, and enslaved in Egypt. So Yosef is actually the key to understanding the beginning of the story, because it's the Yosef story that propels the story forward and brings the Jewish people ultimately to the land of Mitzrayim, right? It's the Egyptian exile that we need to talk about before we can talk about our redemption. So what I want to suggest is that Yosef actually ties together these five qualities, because if you're telling me that Yosef was responsible for getting us into exile, then it must be, if we can somehow do a tikkun for Yosef's quote unquote mistakes, that we can get out of exile. 5 things. They all directly in the text, you don't need midrashim, they all speak to Yosef. Changing his name from a Hebrew name to an Egyptian name. Who does that in the Torah? I can only think of one person, Yosef. His name is Yosef, except he becomes known by the name Tzafnat Paneach. Right? Who changes their language in the Torah? And again, it's explicit in the text. The Torah tells us when the brothers come down to Egypt, they don't know that Yosef understands them because they're talking Hebrew, but when they were speaking to the viceroy, who they don't know is Yosef, they use an interpreter. There's a translator, indicating that Yosef had changed his language. His day-to-day language was not Hebrew, it was Egyptian, whatever they were speaking in ancient Egypt. He changed his dress. The Torah says so explicitly when he's ushered in out of the jail to meet Paro, right? He is dressed in special garments to become the person in front of Paro, and then dressed again in royal garments when he becomes the viceroy. How did Yosef create so much enmity with his brothers in the first place? He spoke Lashon Hara about them. He brought dibah, he brought reports about his brothers to their father. And with respect to the preservation of sexual boundaries, it's true that Yosef never committed adultery with Eshes Potiphar, but he came awfully close, right? And it was actually a kind of failure to have sufficient boundaries to prevent exactly what happened, an event which ended up leaving him in prison and again propelling the story forward. So if Yosef changes his name and changes his language and changes his clothes and speaks Lashon Hara and isn't careful about sexual boundaries, then presumably, and as a result, we end up in exile, then presumably the way to get out of exile is to be extra cautious and careful about maintaining exactly those 5 things. Okay. One of the other drushos that we say is a line. Let me just see if I can find it in the Haggadah. The pasuk says toward the end of Arami Ovid Avi, "V'yotzienu Hashem miMitzrayim b'yad chazak of zernatu v'mor gadol v'mosos v'mosim." But Hashem took us out of Egypt with an outstretched hand. And then the drasha, "V'yotzienu Hashem miMitzrayim." What does it mean that Hashem took us out of Egypt? Lo al yidei malach, v'lo al yidei saraf, v'lo al yidei shaliach, ela kadosh baruch hu b'chvodo v'atzma. The Exodus did not take place with any intermediary. There was no malach, there was no saraf, there was no shaliach. It was Hashem himself. Because it says, "V'yotzienu Hashem miMitzrayim." What's the significance of this passage? So I want to share with you a beautiful comment of Rav Kook, who writes the following. He says, of course, we understand the point. We want to emphasize that this was Hashem's doing, and He orchestrated the redemption of Himself. But there's also another dimension. A malach is called a malach from the word melacha. You ever notice the Rashi says this a number of times over the course of his commentary on the Torah? A malach can only have one shlichus. Why do there need to be three malachim who visit Abraham? Why can't there just be one? And one could bring the news and refuah shlema and save Lot. And no, why do there need to be three different people, three different characters? Because a malach can only do one shlichut, or as Rav Kook would say, a malach can only do his specific melacha. A melacha, related to the word malach, a melacha is a one-off. It's a job. So you hire me to do my melacha, I do my melacha, and then I'm out. Right? It was just a contract. I don't have a relationship. It's not ongoing. I don't work for you. I just was doing this one specific mission, this one specific job, and then I'm done. So Rav Kook says this is the force of this drasha in the Haggadah. Hashem, in the redemption of the Jewish people, was not performing a melacha. There was no malach because it wasn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing event. The notion of Hashem's relationship with the Jewish people, the notion that Hashem will redeem the Jewish people, that's not like, oh, there was this singular event in Jewish history. Yes, there was a singular event in Jewish history, but it just betokens a relationship in which events like that will happen all the time in Jewish history, because that's what divine providence is all about, and that's what it means for Hashem to have this special relationship with his chosen people, with Yisrael. What happens if someone gets married today? If someone gets married today, so if you do the math, they would still be having Sheva brachos at the Seder, and it kind of wreaks havoc on the Arba Kosos, because you're going to have Sheva brachos, and when do you have them? You attach them to benching, and who's going to drink them? And it's a whole discussion which we won't have now. But the Gra and others are quick to point out that before we get to the bracha of on the matzah, there are Sheva brachos at the Seder. I'm not going to count them. There are a lot of different ways to count them, and you'll decide if it's compelling or not. But there's this image that somehow at the Seder, before we eat matzah, we have Sheva brachos. So what's the meaning of this metaphor? The Yerushalmi has another metaphor. This year it's especially complicated because Erev Pesach is a Shabbos. So you can't have hamotzi on challah, on chametz, after whatever time it is, 10:45, and then everybody knows, and you can't do it on matzah because we don't eat matzah on Erev Pesach. So we don't eat matzah on Erev Pesach. There might be a few reasons why we don't eat matzah on Erev Pesach. The Talmud Yerushalmi says if someone does eat matzah on Erev Pesach, you know what it's analogous to? It's analogous to a groom who sleeps with his bride before the chuppah. Like you rushed ahead, you went out of order, and you violated something that you shouldn't have violated. So these metaphors point to the notion that eating matzah in its right time is actually meant to symbolize the consummation of a new relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people. This is the bread of our faith. It reminds us of the moment that we ran off with Hashem into a barren wilderness, Lech Tech Acharai Bamidbar, to begin this new relationship, which again is considered, velakachti is always the language of intimacy, the language of husband and wife. The redemption is meant to lead to the marriage of Hashem and the Jewish people. So on the anniversary of that special night, on the anniversary of the coming together of this couple, Hashem and the Jewish people, matzah is a renewal of our faith, of our covenant, and our relationship with Hashem. And so, if there's some kind of chuppah happening here with the matzah, then maybe it's not surprising that we find Sheva brachos at the Seder. Let me share with you a comment. It's hard to put all of this in context. We're celebrating the Seder in 2025, a year and a half after October 7. There are 59 hostages who remain in Gaza. We believe that 24 of them are still alive. We're celebrating redemption. We're celebrating Zman Cherusenu at a time in Jewish history when there are captives, when there are people who are not in a position of cherus, and I'm sure all of you saw it and heard it, and it's so haunting when Eli Sharabi testified in front of the UN. Right, he gave this image like we don't appreciate, just to be able to walk over to a refrigerator and take something to eat. That's what it means to be free. And he said, and I didn't have that because I was a captive, because I was kidnapped and held in Gaza, and I didn't enjoy any of the freedoms that normal people just to walk over to the fridge. And it's such a powerful and haunting image. So what does it mean for us to be celebrating Pesach at this moment? I want to share with you a comment from Ruby Chain. Ruby Chain is the father of Itai Chain. Itai Chain's fate was not immediately known after October 7th. He was missing, and they thought perhaps he was alive and had been taken hostage. In fact, it was later determined that he was murdered on October 7th by Hamas, and that his body was taken. And so his body remains in Gaza. American citizen, American Israeli citizen, member of the IDF, murdered on October 7th, and his family just wants to bring his body home so that he could be buried in the land of Israel. So Ruby Chain mentioned in this context a medrash. So we say in Hallel, pasuk from Tehillim, we'll sing it on Seder night, Hayam Ra'av Vayanos, that the sea, the Yam Suf, saw something and split. What is it, the Medrash says, that caused the sea to split? What did the sea see? The Medrash answers that the sea saw Rono Shel Yosef. The sea saw the coffin of Yosef. Remember the beginning of Parshas Beshalach? It's quite arresting and quite bizarre. The Torah is narrating the exodus of the Jewish people and the pursuit of the Egyptians, and they're about to get to Yam Suf, and then in the middle of nowhere, the Torah just reminds us, we hadn't heard about this before, that Moshe took with him when he left Egypt the bones of Yosef. So the Medrash puts it together and says there's a literary connection here. Hayam Ra'av Vayanos. The sea saw something. Bayanos really means like run away. So there's someone else in the Torah who's described as having run away, and that is Yosef. In that story of Eshes Potiphar, he ran away. He didn't commit the sin of adultery with the wife of Potiphar. In the merit of Moshe's bringing the Aron of Yosef, who ran away, the sea sees the Aron of Yosef and it runs away. It splits. This is the medrash. Ruby Chain cited this medrash, and he said you have to understand that Moshe knew all of this ahead of time. The Medrash doesn't say this. Ruby Chain says this. It says Moshe knew. Moshe knew that if I show up with the Jewish people to Yam Suf without Yosef, the sea will not split, and that'll be the end, because we'll be between a rock and a hard place. We'll have the sea on one side of us, the Egyptian army on the other, and we won't be able to survive. So all the people are busy on Seder night getting ready, and they're baking their matzah, and they're packing their bags, and they're asking the neighbors for the gold and silver. And Moshe's not doing any of those things. Moshe is busy finding the Aron of Yosef to make good on the promise that the brothers had made hundreds of years earlier. Yosef had said, make sure when the time comes, when Hashem redeems you, bring me with you, take my bones and bury them in the promised land, because the redemption is coming. So Moshe knew, if I don't take with me the Aron of Yosef, if I don't make good on that promise to make sure that one of the brothers is not left behind, then the redemption will actually hit a wall, and the redemption won't take place. The redemption is actually contingent on making sure that Yosef's bones are brought to burial in Israel. And so Ruby Chain says, if you just follow the logic, the redemption doesn't happen. The redemption is not complete as long as one of us is still left behind, if the Aron of Yosef is still left behind. And I think it's such a powerful and haunting image to carry with us on this Pesach, with 59 captives still in Gaza. We're going to celebrate and we're going to be joyous. That's what the Torah demands of us. That's our obligation. We're going to engage fully in the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. We're going to tell our kids what it means to be Jewish, what it means to have Jewish values, and what it means to propagate the story and make sure that we do everything we can so that we have Jewish grandchildren. And we're going to be thinking about Itai Chain and the other 58 Jewish souls that remain in Gaza unredeemed. Unredeemed. Let me conclude with two final thoughts. Two final thoughts. On every normal holiday, regular day, Shabbos, if someone invites guests to their home, the practice is, if I'm the host and you're the guest, and it's time for benching, I honor you with the kavod of leading the benching. And on Seder night, we suspend that practice. And on Seder night, it's the host who leads the benching. It's the host who leads the benching. And it's a little bit funny, like why should that be? And Rav Soloveitchik wasn't actually answering this question, but he once said the following. He said, if you do your Seder right, and everybody comes together, and they are fully invested, and they're fully engaged, and they're asking the right questions, and they're talking up a storm, and they're getting the kids to take an interest in the conversation, and they have the matzah and the maror, and they have the meal, and everything is elevated into the service of Hashem. And that's the goal, right? Like there's no small talk at the Seder. Like everything is holy. I'm going to put on a kittel and I'm going to sit down, and the way I sit is going to be in a certain way, and the way I drink is going to be a certain way, and the way I eat and the way I talk and the question, like everything is elevated at the Seder. Rav Soloveitchik says if everything is elevated at the Seder, it's like we just flatten the landscape. I'm the host, you're the guest. No, we're all just Abdei Hashem. We're all just people sitting around the table doing what we're meant to do because Hashem has commanded us that on this night we're going to eat matzah, and we're going to eat maror, we're going to tell the story of Sipur Tzis Mitzrayim, and we're going to drink the Arba Kosos. And so we just flatten that whole landscape. So maybe someone will be leading the Seder, and that person can lead the benching. There's a question and an answer, and there's a statement and a response, right? We do have those relationships at the Seder, but host and guest, that distinction doesn't really exist at the Seder. So there's no special reason to start deciding who's a host and who's a guest. I'll conclude with a thought that I'm sure I've shared in the past from my old friend Rabbi David Walensky, who said the following. We get to the end of the Seder and we sing the song Echad Mi Yodea, and it's a funny song. What does it have to do with the Seder? Who knows 6? I know 6. 6 of the orders of the Mishnah. Are we talking about 6 orders of the Mishnah? Like there's nothing to do with anything. Why are we talking about that? And he said, it's like a word association. Like I say 6 and you say Mishnah, right? And if you're so enveloped in the project of the Seder, then it's just like all your associations immediately, like first thing that comes to mind, I say 3 and you say 3 avos, and I say 5 and you say 5 books of the Torah. Like it's the proof that like the Seder worked. Right? I got to the end, and now like I'm so in it. I'm so invested in the project and in the mission of the Seder that all of my first reactions, all of my natural associations are directly like Torah-based associations. That's how you know that the Seder worked. We're just about out of time, so I'm going to stay on and happy to take any questions or comments. I wish everyone a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. May your Seders be elevating for you and all those around the Seder table. And at Azman Cheresenu, may we all be Zocha to experience the Geula B'Mehera V'Yamin.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I was just going to say about the last one, Echad Mi Yodea, that I think it does more than really talk about the Seder. It talks about Jewish faith. That's what you're left with. That this is the whole point, so I think it's giving that kind of a high to everyone at the end, that Chad Hashem. So that's our starting point, and that's our ending point, really.
Perfect. Beautiful.
So.
Beautiful.
Anyway, thank you so much for all the Torah here. We'll have lots to say at the Seder.
A pleasure.
All the best, dear Rabbi. Thank you so much.
All the best. A pleasure. Dana, did you want to jump in?
I did, yeah. Are we gonna still record? But it's fine. It's fine if we are.
I can stop. I'll stop the recording. Stop.
Yeah, let's stop. Okay.